The council chamber fell silent as Duchess Seraphine Vale rose from her seat, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with rage she'd buried for 18 months. Across the table, Lady Varella Thorne smiled that patient, poisonous smile, the one that had crushed a dozen noblewomen before her. "Sit down, child," Varella said softly. "The adults are speaking." But Seraphine didn't sit. Behind her, 3 military commanders and 5 regional lords remained standing. The room shifted. For the first time in 30 years, someone had called Varella's bluff, and won. This is how a duchess is born. This is how an empire burns and rebuilds. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wedding had been perfect. Too perfect. That should have been Seraphine's first warning. She remembered standing in the cathedral, sunlight fracturing through stained glass, casting her in blues and golds, while Duke Alaric Thorne slid the ring onto her finger. His hands were steady, a warrior's hands, scarred from sword work and roughened from years in the field, the kind of hands that had broken siege lines and held together alliances. When he looked at her, there was something almost apologetic in his gray eyes, though she didn't understand it then. "You're mine now," he'd whispered, and she'd smiled because she thought he meant it. The reception stretched into evening. Lords and ladies from across the realm pressed forward to offer congratulations, their faces a blur of practiced smiles and calculated interest. Seraphine wore crimson silk. Alaric's choice, he'd said, though she later learned everything in the Thorne household was someone's choice, and that someone was rarely the Duke. It was during the third toast that Seraphine first saw her. Lady Varella Thorne sat at the high table's center, not at the end where a dowager typically resided, but in the seat of authority, with Alaric to her right and Seraphine to her left. She was a striking woman, perhaps 55, with iron gray hair swept into an elaborate crown of braids and eyes the color of winter slate. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was the kind of expression that made grown men check their purse strings and reconsider their investments. "To the Duchess," Varella had said, raising her glass. The crowd echoed the toast, but something in the way she said it, the slight emphasis on the as if the title were a costume Seraphine was trying on rather than a position she now held, made her stomach tighten. "To family," Seraphine had replied, meeting Varella's eyes. Varella's smile widened a fraction. "Indeed." That night, Alaric carried her across the threshold of the ducal apartments. The rooms were vast, 3 chambers connected by arched doorways, furnished in dark wood and deep green velvet. A fire crackled in the bedroom hearth. Servants had turned down the bed and left wine on the side table. "It's beautiful," Seraphine said, running her fingers along the carved bedpost. "My father commissioned these rooms when he married my mother," Alaric said. He was already unlacing his formal coat, his movements efficient and impersonal. "She's redone them twice since, most recently last month. She has excellent taste. She has opinions about everything." He said it without malice, just fact. "You'll learn that soon enough." He made love to her with the same efficiency he applied to everything else, thorough, competent, and somehow distant, as if part of him were still in the field commanding troops or reviewing supply lines. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, one arm draped across her waist. Seraphine lay awake, staring at the canopy above, wondering why she felt less like a wife and more like an acquisition. The next morning, she woke to find Alaric's side of the bed empty and cold. A maid she didn't recognize was drawing back the curtains. "Good morning, Your Grace," the girl said, bobbing a curtsy. "Lady Varella requests your presence at breakfast in 1 hour. She's laid out your dress." Seraphine sat up. "I'm sorry, she's done what?" The maid gestured to a gown draped across the chair by the window. It was lovely, pale blue silk with silver threading, but it wasn't anything Seraphine had brought with her from the Vale estates. "Lady Varella thought this would be appropriate for your first morning as Duchess," the maid explained. "She's very particular about appearances." "I see," Seraphine kept her voice neutral. "And where is the Duke?" "In the training yard, Your Grace. He rises at dawn." Of course he did. Seraphine dressed in the blue gown because arguing with a maid about her mother-in-law's clothing choices seemed like a battle not worth fighting. Not yet. She descended to the breakfast room, a smaller, more intimate space than the great hall, with windows overlooking the eastern gardens. Varela was already seated, reading correspondence while sipping tea. She looked up when Seraphine entered. "Ah, there you are. The dress suits you." It wasn't quite a compliment. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Seraphine sat. A servant immediately appeared with tea and pastries. "I thought we might review the household schedule," Varela continued, setting aside her letters. "As Duchess, you'll have certain ceremonial duties, of course. Greeting visiting dignitaries, hosting teas, that sort of thing. I'll guide you through the particulars." "That's kind of you," Seraphine said carefully, "though I managed my father's estate for 3 years before marrying. I'm familiar with administrative duties." Varela's smile was indulgent. "The Vale estates are charming, dear, but this is the duchy. The scale is rather different. You'll find it easier to observe for a time before taking on responsibilities." It was said so smoothly, so reasonably, that arguing would have made Seraphine sound petulant. She bit into a pastry instead, the sweetness turning to ash in her mouth. "The Duke and I have a council meeting at noon," Varela went on. "It will likely run long. Trade disputes with the northern provinces. Tedious business. I've arranged for you to tour the gardens with Lady Millicent Grayson. She's harmless and will fill you in on the court gossip." "Will I not be attending the council meeting?" Seraphine asked. Varela looked genuinely puzzled. "Whatever for?" "I'm the Duchess." "Yes, and your presence would be noted and appreciated at appropriate functions." Varela poured herself more tea. "But council meetings deal with military strategy, taxation policy, border negotiations, matters that require years of experience to navigate. Alaric and I have been managing these affairs since before you were born. There's no need to burden yourself." "Burden." As if governance were a weight to be avoided rather than a responsibility to embrace. Seraphine set down her cup with deliberate care. "I would still like to attend." Varela's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, a subtle cooling, like the first frost of winter. "Of course," Varela said, "if you feel you must." The council chamber was oak-paneled and windowless, lit by iron chandeliers that cast everything in amber half-light. A long table dominated the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. When Seraphine entered, the men already seated, and they were all men, looked up with expressions ranging from confusion to poorly concealed irritation. Alaric sat at the head of the table with Varela to his immediate right. The chair to his left was empty. "Gentlemen," Alaric said, "my wife will be observing today's proceedings." Observing? Seraphina walked to the empty chair and sat before anyone could object. "I was under the impression I would be participating." Lord Castor, the master of coin, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, these discussions can be rather dry. Technical financial matters, mostly." "Then I'm certain I'll learn something valuable." Varela leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "By all means, dear, though do feel free to excuse yourself if you find it overwhelming." The meeting was, in fact, technical, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was fascinating. The duchy faced a grain shortage in the western provinces due to unexpected floods. The northern border lords were threatening to withhold tax payments unless Alaric intervened in a mining dispute. The trade routes through the southern pass needed renegotiation now that the Merchant Council had raised tariffs. Seraphine listened, taking mental notes, watching how Varela orchestrated the room. She never raised her voice. She rarely even disagreed openly. Instead, she asked questions, pointed, precise questions that led men to the conclusions she'd already reached. "Commander Thanes," Varela said when the military advisor suggested reinforcing the northern garrisons. "How many men would that require?" 300, my lady, perhaps 4. "And those men would come from the southern fortifications, most likely." "Interesting. Lord Castor, didn't you mention last month that bandit activity has increased along the southern trade routes?" Castor nodded. 17 merchant caravans raided in the past quarter. Varela turned back to Commander Thane. "So we would weaken our southern defenses, where banditry is rising, to reinforce the north, where the border lords are already obligated by treaty to maintain their own garrisons?" Thane shifted in his seat. "When you put it that way, I'm simply ensuring we consider all factors." Varela's smile was gentle. "Perhaps we might explore alternative solutions." By the meeting's end, Varela had quietly redirected every major decision while making it seem like collaborative consensus. Alaric signed off on each resolution with barely a word. He wasn't weak. Seraphine could see that. He was simply accustomed. This was how things had always been done. When the council adjourned, Seraphine remained seated as the lords filed out. Alaric gathered his papers. "Well?" he asked. "Was Lord Castor right? Too dry?" "It was illuminating." Varella stood, smoothing her skirts. "You did well, dear. Sitting quietly and observing is an excellent way to learn." "I had several questions, actually." "Did you?" Varella tilted her head. "How curious that you didn't voice them." "I wasn't sure interrupting was appropriate." "Very wise." Varella collected her own papers. "One must know when to speak and when to listen. That's the difference between wisdom and ambition." She left before Seraphine could respond. Alaric lingered, looking vaguely uncomfortable. "She means well," he said. "Does she?" "My mother has kept this duchy running for 30 years. First when my father was alive and distracted by wars, then after he died and I was too young to rule. She knows what she's doing." "I'm sure she does." Seraphine stood. "But I'm your wife now, your duchess. Doesn't that mean something?" Alaric's jaw tightened. "Of course it does. Then why do I feel like I'm still a guest here?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of response. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Seraphine attended councils, teas, and formal dinners. She smiled, nodded, and played the role of the gracious duchess. But every decision, from menu planning to diplomatic correspondence, was filtered through Varella first. Servants answered to Varella. Nobles sought Varella's counsel. Even Alaric, in moments of uncertainty, turned to his mother before his wife. At a banquet honoring the Eastern lords, Seraphine wore emerald silk and the Thorn family diamonds. She stood beside Alaric to receive guests, saying all the right things, laughing at the appropriate moments. But when Lord Harwick, an influential trade minister, approached to discuss tariff adjustments, he addressed his concerns to Varella, who stood 3 steps behind. "Lady Varella, I wonder if we might revisit the grain export restrictions." "Of course, Harwick. Send the details to my study. We'll arrange a meeting." Seraphine might as well have been furniture. That night she confronted Alaric in their chambers. Why do they speak to her instead of me? He was unlacing his boots. "Because she handles those matters." "I'm the Duchess. I should handle them." "You haven't been Duchess for even 2 months. These are complex negotiations with men who've known my mother for decades. They trust her. And they don't trust me. They don't know you yet." He said it like that was supposed to be comforting. "They won't know me if I'm never allowed to do anything." Seraphine paced the room, frustration bubbling up. "Every letter I write is reviewed. Every guest list is adjusted. Even the servants won't take orders from me without checking with her first. I'm a figurehead." Alaric stood, and for a moment she thought he might actually hear her. "My mother has connections I don't have. Experience I haven't earned yet. If you're patient—" "Patient?" Seraphine laughed, bitter. "How long was she patient? How many years did she wait before taking control?" "That was different." "How?" "Because—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because she had to. My father was a warrior, not a statesman. Someone had to manage the duchy." "And now? Now she still does." He said it like it was simple. "It works, Seraphine. Why are you trying to break something that functions?" "Because I'm supposed to be part of that function, not an ornament beside it." He looked at her with something close to pity. "You're 23 years old. You think you know how to run a duchy?" The words hit like a slap. "Your mother was 22 when she married your father, and she spent a decade learning before she made any real decisions. You're asking for power you haven't earned." "I'm asking for the position I was promised when I married you." His expression closed off. "You're being unreasonable." He left, actually walked out of their bedchamber and didn't return until she was asleep. When she woke the next morning, he was already gone. Seraphine stopped arguing after that. Not because she accepted the situation, but because she realized arguing was useless. Alaric didn't see the problem. To him, the duchy ran smoothly, his mother was competent, and Seraphine's frustration was youthful impatience. So she changed tactics. She started attending every function she could, not just the ones Varella deemed appropriate, but the smaller gatherings, the informal meetings, the tedious administrative reviews. She smiled at minor nobles, remembered servants' names, asked questions about crop yields and trade manifests and supply chain logistics. She made herself useful in ways that didn't require Varella's approval. In the estate library, she found records dating back 50 years, ledgers, correspondence, council minutes. She read them late into the night, learning the duchy's history, its debts, its alliances. She learned which families had supported the Thorns and which had needed persuading. She learned where the money flowed and where it dried up. And she learned about Varella. The woman was brilliant. Seraphine couldn't deny that. She'd navigated the duchy through 2 wars, a famine, and a succession crisis that should have torn the realm apart. She'd built alliances, crushed rebellions, and turned the Thorn Duchy into the most powerful region in the realm. She'd done it all while letting men believe they were in charge. But there were cracks. Lord Gavin of the Western Provinces, for instance. He'd been asking for infrastructure support for 3 years: roads, bridges, irrigation systems. Varella kept promising to address it, but never followed through. His letters grew increasingly frustrated. Lady Helena, a minor noble with significant influence among the merchant class, had been overlooked for a position on the Trade Council in favor of Lord Petty, who had no experience but was Varella's nephew. Commander Thane, brilliant in the field but terrible at politics, had been passed over for promotion twice. His loyalty to Alaric was unquestionable, but Varella didn't trust anyone she couldn't control. These were small grievances, individually, but collectively they formed a pattern. Varella maintained power by keeping everyone slightly off balance, grateful enough to stay loyal, frustrated enough to need her favor. Seraphine started making adjustments. Small ones. Quiet ones. She wrote to Lord Gavin personally, expressing sympathy for the Western Province's infrastructure challenges and suggesting he compile a detailed proposal. She made sure to mention it to Alaric later, casually, as if she'd just heard about it. She invited Lady Helena to tea and asked her advice on merchant relations. Helena was initially suspicious, but Seraphine's interest was genuine, and she left the meeting feeling heard, perhaps for the first time in years. She complimented Commander Thane's tactical reports at a dinner, loudly enough for Alaric to hear, and later suggested to her husband that Thane might be valuable in planning the spring military exercises. None of it was rebellion. Not yet. She was just being a good duchess, connecting with her people. Surely even Varella couldn't object to that, but Varella noticed everything. "You've been busy," she remarked one morning over breakfast. Seraphine looked up from her tea. "I'm trying to get to know the court." I noticed you've been corresponding with Lord Gavin. His infrastructure concerns seemed pressing. They're not as pressing as he makes them sound." Varella's voice was light, conversational. "Gavin has been crying poverty for a decade while investing heavily in personal estates. If we gave him funds for roads, he'd pocket half and complain the rest wasn't enough. Perhaps he's frustrated because he's been ignored." Varella set down her cup. "Careful, dear. You're still learning who can be trusted and who's simply looking for advantages." "I'm learning quite a lot, actually." Their eyes met across the table. For just a moment, Varella's mask slipped and Seraphine saw something cold and calculating beneath the maternal warmth. "I'm sure you are," Varella said softly. "Just remember, every action in this court has consequences, intended and otherwise." It was a warning, polite, subtle, but unmistakable. Seraphine smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." 3 months into her marriage, Seraphine attended her first regional council, a gathering of the duchy's most powerful lords to discuss resource allocation and military positioning. It was held in the Great Hall, with over 30 nobles in attendance. Seraphine entered beside Alaric, expecting to take the seat she'd been assigned at the far end of the table, away from the real discussions. But as they approached, she noticed something. Lord Gavin had attended, along with 3 other Western lords who rarely made the journey. Lady Helena was there, seated among the merchants. Even Commander Thane looked more alert than usual. Varella, presiding from Alaric's right, noticed too. Her eyes swept the room, calculating. The meeting began with the usual reports: tax revenues, garrison strengths, trade agreements. Seraphine sat quietly, as expected. But when the discussion turned to Western Province infrastructure, Lord Gavin stood. "Your Grace," he addressed Alaric, "I've prepared a detailed proposal for road improvements, as Duchess Seraphine suggested." The room stirred. Varella's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the armrest. The Duchess suggested this? Alaric looked at Seraphine. Lord Gavin's letters were very thorough, Seraphine said calmly. It seemed worth exploring. Gavin presented his proposal: costs, timelines, projected economic impact. It was solid work, clearly refined over years of being ignored. When he finished, several other lords voiced support. Varella let them talk, then leaned forward. It's an admirable proposal, Gavin. Unfortunately, the Treasury is committed to Northern Garrison expansion. Perhaps next year. Actually, Seraphine said, and the room went silent. I reviewed the ledgers last week. We're running a surplus in the agricultural tariffs. If we reallocate funds from the ceremonial budget, the Spring Festival budget is consistently overfunded by 30%. We could finance the infrastructure repairs without touching military expenditures. It was the first time she'd openly contradicted Varella in public. Alaric blinked. You reviewed the ledgers? I am the Duchess. I thought I should understand our finances. Lord Castor, the master of coin, looked between Varella and Seraphine like a man watching a duel. The Duchess is not incorrect. The festival budget has been overfunded since I allocated those funds for diplomatic hospitality, Varella cut in smoothly. Events that strengthen alliances and project power. Hardly frivolous. Of course not, Seraphine agreed. But perhaps we could strengthen alliances and build roads. The Western lords are part of this duchy too. The room held its breath. It was the gentlest possible challenge, phrased as collaborative suggestion rather than confrontation. But everyone heard what it really was, a claim to authority. Varella smiled. An interesting perspective. Though infrastructure policy requires understanding long-term strategic implications beyond surface-level arithmetic. Then perhaps you could explain those implications, Seraphine said. I'm eager to learn. It was a trap, and Varella knew it. If she explained, she validated Seraphine's right to question. If she dismissed the question, she looked condescending in front of the lords. Varella chose a third option. She turned to Alaric. Your Grace, I think this matter deserves more detailed private discussion before we commit to any changes. Shall we table it for now? Alaric, caught between his wife and his mother, did what he'd been trained to do. He deferred. Agreed. We'll review the numbers and reconvene next month. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. Seraphine had forced the conversation, made her competence visible, and shown the lords that she could hold her own in these discussions. As the council adjourned, Lord Gavin approached her. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me yet. The decision hasn't been made. No, but you listened. That's more than I've gotten in 3 years. Others approached too. Lady Helena, Commander Thane, several minor nobles who'd felt overlooked or undervalued. They didn't pledge loyalty or make grand promises, but they saw her now, really saw her. Varella saw it too. That night she came to Seraphine's chambers. No servants, no pretense of casual conversation. She closed the door and faced Seraphine directly. You made a mistake today. Seraphine set down her book. Did I? You challenged me in front of the council. That was foolish. I presented an alternative perspective. That's hardly a challenge. Don't play naive. It doesn't suit you. Varella crossed the room and suddenly she seemed taller, more formidable. I've been running this duchy since before you were born. I've navigated wars, famines, and rebellions. I've kept this family in power when lesser houses crumbled. And you think 3 months of reading ledgers and making friends with dissatisfied lords qualifies you to question my decisions? I think being Duchess qualifies me to have opinions about duchy business. Duchess is a title. Power is earned. Varella's voice dropped. You want respect? Prove you deserve it. Because right now, all I see is an ambitious girl playing at politics she doesn't understand. Seraphine stood, meeting Varella's eyes. Then teach me. Isn't that what mothers are supposed to do? I'm not your mother. No, you're my husband's mother, and you've been ruling through him for 30 years. But he has a wife now. That changes things. It changes nothing. Varella's smile was sharp. Alaric trusts me. The lords respect me. The duchy runs because I make it run. You're a pleasant addition to the family, Seraphine, but you're not essential. Remember that. She left, and the door closed with a soft, final click. Seraphine stood alone in the chamber, her heart hammering. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with fury. Because Varela was right about one thing: power had to be earned. Titles meant nothing if you couldn't back them up. But Varela was wrong about something too. Seraphine wasn't playing at politics. She was learning the game from a master, and she was going to win. The winter solstice ball was 3 weeks away, and Seraphine intended to make it count. She sat in the estate library at midnight, surrounded by guest lists, seating charts, and correspondence that dated back 5 years. The ball was traditionally Varela's masterpiece, a demonstration of the duchy's power and refinement, where alliances were cemented and social hierarchies reinforced. Every detail, from the flower arrangements to the wine selection, bore Varela's stamp. This year would be different. "You're up late." Seraphine looked up to find Alaric in the doorway, still in his training clothes, sweat darkening his collar. He'd taken to spending more time in the barracks lately, whether to avoid the tension between his wife and mother, or simply because war was simpler than family, she couldn't say. "Reviewing the ball preparations," she said. He crossed to the desk, frowning at the papers. "My mother handles all that." "I know, I thought I'd offer assistance." "Assistance." He said it like she'd suggested reorganizing his armory. "Seraphine, she's been planning this event for 30 years. It's perfect, I know." Seraphine kept her voice light. "But I am the Duchess. People will expect me to be involved." Alaric rubbed his face, exhausted. "Can you not do this right now? I've been drilling new recruits for 12 hours. I don't have the energy for another argument about your role in the household." "I'm not arguing. I'm planning a party. You're picking a fight with my mother. I'm trying to be your wife." The words came out sharper than intended. "But apparently that means sitting quietly while she runs everything, including our marriage." He went very still. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you sleep in the barracks 4 nights a week. It means when you are here, you barely speak to me. It means the only time you seem to notice I exist is when I'm inconveniencing your mother." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Seraphine stood, facing him across the desk. "Tell me, Alaric, when was the last time you made a decision without consulting her first?" His jaw tightened. "I consult my most trusted advisor. That's what intelligent rulers do." "I'm your wife. Don't I get a say?" "You would if you understood what you were talking about." The words landed like stones. "You've been here 4 months, Seraphine. 4 months. You think that makes you qualified to question 30 years of experience?" "I think it makes me part of this family. Or was I just supposed to produce heirs and look decorative?" "You're being hysterical." It was the wrong word. Seraphine felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. "Get out." "This is my room. I don't care. Get out before I say something we'll both regret." He stared at her for a long moment, something like regret flickering across his face. Then he turned and left without another word. Seraphine sat back down, hands shaking. She'd known this marriage would be political, not romantic. She hadn't expected love, but she'd hoped for partnership, for respect, for something more than being treated like an inconvenient child. She looked down at the guest lists. Varela had invited the usual suspects: powerful families who'd supported the Thorns for generations, wealthy merchants who supplied the duchy's coffers, military commanders who'd fought alongside Alaric. Safe choices. Predictable choices. Seraphine picked up her pen and started making changes. The next morning, she sent out her own invitations. Not many, just 12. Carefully chosen names that Varela had excluded. Lord Gavin and his Western allies. Lady Helena and her merchant contacts. Minor nobles from the southern provinces who'd been overlooked for years. And Commander Thane's younger officers, talented men who'd been passed over for promotion because they lacked the right connections. She signed each invitation personally and had them delivered before Varela could intercept them. The response was immediate. Varela appeared in Seraphine's chambers that afternoon. No knock, no warning. She held one of the invitations in her hand. "What is this?" Seraphine looked up from her correspondence. "An invitation to the solstice ball. I thought expanding the guest list would show goodwill toward the outer provinces." "You thought." Varela's voice was dangerously quiet. "You thought you would undermine my planning, invite my political opponents, and call it goodwill? Lord Gavin isn't your opponent. He's a loyal vassal who's been asking for recognition. He's a whining incompetent who can't manage his own finances and wants the duchy to subsidize his failures. Or he's been systematically ignored because acknowledging his concerns would mean admitting you've neglected the Western provinces for a decade. The air between them crackled. Varela stepped closer, and for the first time, Seraphine saw real anger beneath the controlled facade. "Listen to me very carefully," Varela said. "I have spent 3 decades building the alliances that keep this duchy stable. Every invitation to that ball serves a purpose. Every seat at every table reinforces relationships that matter. And you, with your 4 months of amateur observation, think you can improve on that? I think those relationships are starting to fray. And if you keep ignoring the cracks, they'll become fractures. There are no cracks. Then why are the Western lords' tax payments 3 months late? Why has Lady Helena been quietly moving her trade contracts to the Eastern duchies? Why did Commander Thane request a transfer last month?" Varela's expression flickered. Just for an instant, surprise broke through. "How do you know about that?" "Because I pay attention. Because I talk to people instead of talking at them." Seraphine stood, meeting Varela's eyes. "You're brilliant. I'm not denying that. But you've been so focused on controlling everything that you haven't noticed some things are slipping through your fingers." "Nothing is slipping. 12 families have reduced their duchy contributions this year. 6 officers have resigned. The Merchant Council is negotiating with Duke Corbin's territories instead of ours. But please, keep telling me everything's fine." Varela's hands clenched. "Rescind those invitations." "No. Seraphine, no." The word felt powerful. "I'm the Duchess. I have every right to invite guests to my own home. This is not your home. This is the Thorn Duchy. And you are a guest here until you prove yourself worthy of— I married your son. That makes me family, whether you like it or not." They stood facing each other, neither backing down. Finally, Varela smiled, cold and sharp as winter frost. "You want to play these games? Fine. But don't come crying when you lose." She left, and Seraphine realized her whole body was trembling. She'd crossed a line. No more polite suggestions or gentle challenges. This was open defiance, and there was no going back. The servants' reactions told her everything she needed to know. Within hours, word had spread that the Duchess and Lady Varela were at odds. Some looked at Seraphine with sympathy, others with poorly concealed schadenfreude. Everyone seemed to be waiting for her inevitable defeat. Only one servant, a younger maid named Clara, who'd been kind to Seraphine from the start, dared speak directly. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but you should be careful." Seraphine looked up from her desk. "Careful of what?" Clara glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. "Lady Varela doesn't lose. Ever. She broke 3 noble women before you, not through cruelty, just through making them irrelevant. Lady Constance, the Duke's first betrothed, she lasted 6 months before fleeing back to her family. Said she couldn't breathe in this house." "I'm not running." "I know, Your Grace. That's what worries me." Clara hesitated. "She'll come at you where you're weakest. That's what she does. Finds the thing you care about most and uses it against you." "Then I'll have to make sure I don't have any weaknesses." Clara's expression said she thought that was impossible, but she curtsied and left. Seraphine sat alone, considering the warning. What did she care about most? Her position, certainly. Her dignity. Her marriage, though that seemed increasingly hollow. But beneath all that, what drove her? The answer came easily. She refused to be erased. The solstice ball preparations became a quiet war. Varela controlled the kitchen, so the menu remained unchanged. She managed the musicians, the decorations, the wine cellars. But Seraphine controlled the guest list. Her 12 additions stood, despite Varela's protests, to Alaric. Alaric, caught between them, chose the coward's path. He approved both lists and retreated to his military duties, leaving the women to battle it out. 5 days before the ball, Lord Gavin arrived early at Seraphine's invitation. She met him in one of the smaller receiving rooms, away from Varela's watchful presence. Gavin was a weathered man in his 50s, with calloused hands and a direct manner that probably hurt him in court politics. "You wanted to see me, Your Grace?" "I wanted to discuss your infrastructure proposal, the one that keeps getting delayed." His expression soured. "With respect, Your Grace, I've learned not to get my hopes up. Lady Varela has been reviewing it for 3 years. What if she didn't have final approval?" Gavin studied her carefully. "Are you saying you have authority to approve it?" "I'm saying the Duke has that authority, and I have his ear." "Do you?" It wasn't rude, just skeptical. Forgive me, but the whole court knows Lady Varella runs things. You're, no offense, very new. I am new, but I'm also the Duchess, and I'm tired of being decorative. Seraphine leaned forward. Here's what I'm proposing. You present your infrastructure plan at the ball, not to me, to the full assembly. Make it public, professional, and irrefutable. Force an open decision. Lady Varella will block it. She can't if everyone's watching. She maintains power through private manipulation. Public confrontation isn't her strength. It's mine. Gavin's eyebrows rose. You're asking me to put my neck out. I'm asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Do you? Seraphine smiled. Not entirely, but I'm learning fast. He laughed, surprised and genuine. You're either very brave or very foolish, Your Grace. Probably both. Are you in? He considered for a long moment. Then he nodded. What the hell? I've got nothing left to lose. The same conversation played out with Lady Helena, with Commander Thane's officers, with the southern nobles. Seraphine was building a coalition, not of rebels, but of people who'd been overlooked and wanted to be seen. She didn't promise them power. She promised them a voice. It was risky. If this backfired, she'd look like a foolish upstart and Varella would crush her. But if it worked, the duchy would have to acknowledge her. The night before the ball, Alaric finally sought her out. She was in their chambers, reviewing her strategy one last time. We need to talk, he said. She set down her notes. About? About tomorrow. About whatever you're planning. He ran a hand through his hair. Seraphine, I know you're frustrated. I know you feel overlooked. But if you embarrass my mother in front of the entire court, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I'm trying to do my job. Your job is to support the duchy's stability. Is it stable, Alaric? Really? She stood facing him. Or are you just so used to how things work that you can't see the problems? There are always problems. That's governance. And who solves them? Who makes the actual decisions? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Your mother is brilliant, Seraphine said. I genuinely mean that, but she's been in control so long that she can't share it, and you've let her lead for so long that you don't know how to rule without her. That's not true. Prove it. Tomorrow, when decisions are made, make them yourself. Not because she tells you to, not because it's easier, because you're the Duke. His jaw worked. And if I disagree with your assessment, if I think my mother's way is better, then tell me that, explain it. Treat me like a partner instead of a problem. Her voice softened. I didn't marry you expecting easy. I expected challenge, work, maybe even conflict. But I thought we'd face it together. Instead, I'm fighting alone while you hide in the barracks. Something shifted in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. I'm not hiding. Then where are you? Where are... He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. Doubt. Not in her, but in himself. In the life he'd built around his mother's shadow. I don't know, he admitted. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her in months. Figure it out, Seraphine said quietly. Because tomorrow changes everything, one way or another. He left without promising anything, but something had cracked in his armor. Whether that crack would widen or seal shut remained to be seen. The solstice ball began at sunset. The great hall had been transformed. Silk banners in thorn crimson and gold, candles by the hundreds, tables laden with food and wine. Musicians played in the gallery. Nobles arrived in their finest, jewels glittering, voices rising in practiced laughter and political small talk. Seraphine wore deep burgundy velvet. The thorn diamonds at her throat, her hair swept up in an elaborate style that Clara had spent 2 hours perfecting. She looked every inch the Duchess. Varella wore black silk with silver threading, elegant and commanding. When they stood side by side to receive guests, the contrast was deliberate. Youth and beauty versus experience and power. The guests noticed. Of course they noticed. The whole court had been waiting for this confrontation. Lord Gavin arrived with his Western allies, looking uncomfortable in formal attire. Lady Helena came with a delegation of merchants. Commander Thane's young officers clustered near the military tables, watchful and tense. Seraphine's additions to the guest list were obvious. They didn't fit the usual social stratification, and their presence disrupted the careful hierarchy Varella had maintained. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. Dinner was served, toasts were made. Alaric said appropriate things about the duchy's prosperity and strength. Varela smiled from her position of authority, every inch the power behind the throne. Then came the part Varela hadn't planned for. Seraphine stood, her glass raised. The room quieted. "I'd like to propose an additional toast," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "To the duchy's future, and to those who will build it." It was a strange toast, vague enough to be meaningless. But Lord Gavin took his cue. He stood, clearing his throat. "Your Graces, if I may, since we're gathered here, I hope to present a proposal that concerns that future." Varela's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened on her wineglass. Gavin outlined his infrastructure plan: roads, bridges, irrigation systems for the western provinces. He'd refined it, made it sharp and specific. He presented costs, timelines, projected economic returns. He made it clear this wasn't begging, it was an investment in the duchy's prosperity. When he finished, the room was silent. Everyone waited to see how Varela would respond. But Seraphine spoke first. How many Western merchants would benefit from improved trade routes? Gavin didn't hesitate. At least 300 directly, perhaps 1,000 indirectly. And tax revenue from those merchants would increase by an estimated 40% within 2 years. Seraphine turned to Lord Castor. "Master of Coin, we discussed the ceremonial budget surplus. Would those funds cover Lord Gavin's proposal?" Castor looked like a man caught between two avalanches. He glanced at Varela, then at Seraphine, then at the entire court watching him. "They would, Your Grace. The numbers are sound." "Then perhaps we should vote on it. Here, tonight, with everyone present to witness the duchy's commitment to all its provinces, not just the favored ones." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in startled conversation. This wasn't how things were done. Decisions were made in private councils, then announced. This public challenge was unprecedented. Varela stood slowly, and the room silenced immediately. "Duchess Seraphine," she said, her voice perfectly controlled, "your enthusiasm is admirable, but complex policy decisions require careful deliberation, not impulsive public votes. There's nothing impulsive about a 3-year-old proposal, which I've been carefully reviewing. While the western provinces deteriorate," Seraphine didn't raise her voice, but her words cut clean. "How long does careful deliberation take? 4 years? 5? Or do we just keep reviewing until Lord Gavin gives up?" "You're simplifying matters you don't fully understand." "Then explain them, right now in front of everyone. Tell us why this proposal shouldn't be approved." It was a direct challenge. No room for maneuvering, no private channels to work through. Varela had 2 choices: explain her reasoning publicly or look like she was blocking progress out of spite. She chose a third option. "Your Grace," she turned to Alaric, "perhaps you'd like to address this." All eyes turned to the Duke. He'd been silent throughout, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Now he stood, and Seraphine's heart hammered. This was the moment. Would he defer to his mother as always, or would he actually lead? Alaric looked at Gavin. "Your proposal, you said 40% revenue increase. How certain are you of that projection?" "Based on current trade volumes and projected growth, Your Grace. I can provide detailed calculations." Alaric nodded slowly. Then he looked at Varela. "Mother, your concerns about this proposal, state them plainly." Varela's expression flickered, surprise, quickly masked. "The timing is poor. We have military expenses, which are funded separately," Lord Castor interjected, then looked shocked at his own boldness. "The ceremonial surplus wouldn't impact military budgets, Lady Varela." "Nevertheless, committing funds without thorough review—" "How much more review do you need?" Alaric's voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. 3 years seems thorough enough." The room held its breath. Seraphine felt frozen, watching her husband finally step into his role. Varela's smile was thin. "Of course, if you've made your decision." "I have." Alaric turned to the assembly. "Lord Gavin's proposal is approved. Lord Castor, work with him on implementation details. I want progress reports monthly." The Western lords erupted in surprise and gratitude. Lady Helena looked stunned. Even Commander Thane cracked a rare smile. And Varela stood very, very still. "Well," she said softly, "how decisive." There was poison in those words. Alaric heard it too, but
but he didn't back down. It's a good proposal. It should have been approved years ago. He looked at his mother directly. Sometimes careful deliberation becomes unnecessary delay.
For just a moment, Seraphine saw something dangerous flash in Varella's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual composed mask. "As you say, Your Grace." She inclined her head, respectful, proper, and absolutely furious beneath the surface. The rest of the ball passed in a blur. People approached Seraphine offering congratulations or thinly veiled curiosity about the power shift they'd just witnessed. Lord Gavin gripped her hand with genuine gratitude. Lady Helena whispered, "That was either genius or suicide. I haven't decided which." Through it all, Seraphine watched Varella work the room with her usual grace, giving no sign that anything had changed. But it had. Everyone felt it. Near midnight, as guests began departing, Varella approached Seraphine in a quiet corner. "Congratulations," she said. "You got what you wanted." "I got what the Western provinces needed." "Don't pretend this was altruism. You wanted to prove yourself. You wanted to win." Varella's smile was cold. "Well, you've won a battle, but you have no idea what you've started." "Neither do you." Varella laughed, soft and humorless. "I know exactly what I've started. I've built empires, child. What have you built?" "We'll find out." They stood facing each other, two women who'd just declared open war in the most civilized way possible. "One piece of advice," Varella said. "When you challenge power, you'd better be prepared to seize it completely. Half measures will destroy you. And right now all you've done is make me angry." She walked away, leaving Seraphine alone with the implications of what she'd begun. Alaric found her an hour later, after the last guests had left. The great hall was being cleaned, servants moving quietly through the space. "That was quite a performance," he said. "It wasn't a performance. It was governance." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother is furious." "I know. She'll retaliate." "I know that too." "And you did it anyway." He sounded almost curious. "Why?" "Because someone had to, and you weren't going to." He flinched but didn't argue. "What happens now?" "Now we find out if you meant what you said in there, or if tomorrow you'll go back to letting her make all the decisions." "I'm not—" He stopped, frustrated. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. You're either the Duke or you're not. And you're either my wife or my adversary." The words stung. "I'm trying to be your partner. There's a difference." He looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since they'd married. "I don't know how to do this. My whole life she's been there, making sure everything worked. I don't know how to rule without her." "Then learn. We'll figure it out together." "What if we can't?" It was the fear beneath everything, that he was too dependent, that she was too ambitious, that they'd destroy each other trying to find balance. "Then we fail," Seraphine said, "but at least we'll fail trying to build something real instead of living in her shadow forever." He didn't promise anything, but he didn't walk away either. They stood together in the empty hall, two people who'd just set fire to the life they knew, waiting to see what would rise from the ashes. In her chambers, Varella stood alone, staring out at the winter night. She'd underestimated the girl. That was unusual for her, and deeply irritating. She'd assumed Seraphine would break like the others, overwhelmed by the complexity, demoralized by being overlooked, eventually retreating into comfortable irrelevance. Instead, she'd found allies, built coalitions, forced public confrontation in a way Varella couldn't easily counter without looking tyrannical, clever. But cleverness wasn't enough. Seraphine had won tonight because Alaric had supported her. But Alaric was weak, suggestible, and ultimately loyal to his mother above all else. That loyalty just needed reinforcement. Varella smiled in the darkness. The girl thought this was about infrastructure proposals and guest lists. She thought it was about respect and recognition. She had no idea what real power cost. But she was about to learn. Varella's retaliation came swiftly, but not in the way Seraphine expected. The morning after the ball, Seraphine woke to find Alaric already gone. Nothing unusual there. He'd been avoiding their chambers since the confrontation. But when she descended for breakfast, the servants moved past her with careful neutrality, their eyes downcast. Clara, normally warm, barely met her gaze. "What's happened?" Seraphine asked. Clara glanced towards the breakfast room. Lady Varela requested a private family meeting, Your Grace. With the Duke. She specifically said you weren't needed. The dismissal stung, but Seraphine kept her expression neutral. I see. When did this meeting begin? An hour ago. An hour. They'd been talking for an hour without her. Seraphine felt the familiar burn of frustration, but she pushed it down. Getting emotional wouldn't help. She needed information. She found them in Varela's private study, a room Seraphine had never been invited to enter. The door was closed, but voices carried through the heavy wood. She shouldn't eavesdrop. It was beneath her dignity as Duchess. She pressed her ear to the door anyway. Cannot continue like this, Varela was saying. She's inexperienced, reckless. Last night proved that.
She got results. Alaric's voice, quieter.
She embarrassed this family in front of the entire court, made decisions without proper consultation, undermined 30 years of carefully built relationships. She gave Lord Gavin what he'd been asking for, what we should have given him years ago. You don't understand the complexity? Then explain it to me. There was an edge to Alaric's voice now, because from where I'm standing, we ignored a loyal vassal for 3 years and my wife fixed it in one night. Silence. Then Varela's voice, softer, more dangerous. Your wife is turning you against your own mother. That's not, isn't it? A few months ago you trusted my judgment. Now suddenly I'm the problem? Her voice caught, just slightly. I've given my entire life to this duchy. To you. And this is how you repay me? The shift was masterful. Seraphine could almost see it, Varela pivoting from political argument to emotional manipulation, making this about loyalty and betrayal instead of policy and governance. Mother, I'm not turning against you. I'm trying to find balance. Balance? Is that what she calls it? Varela's laugh was bitter. She's ambitious, Alaric. She wants power, and she's using you to get it. Or maybe she just wants to be included in decisions that affect her life. She's been here 4 months. 4 months? And she thinks she knows better than I do? I think she sees things we've stopped noticing. Another pause. When Varela spoke again, her voice was cold. If you continue down this path, you'll regret it. The court is watching. They see weakness, division. That's how dynasties fall. Then maybe we need to show them unity instead of pretending division doesn't exist. Unity requires trust. Can you honestly say you trust her judgment over mine? The question hung in the air. Seraphine's heart pounded, waiting for his answer. I trust that we need to change, Alaric said finally. Whether I'm ready or not. It wasn't a declaration of loyalty to Seraphine, but it wasn't capitulation to Varela either. It was something in between, uncertain, uncomfortable, but moving in the right direction. Seraphine stepped back from the door before they emerged. When Alaric found her in the corridor moments later, he looked exhausted. We need to talk, he said. They walked the eastern gardens in silence, past winter bare trees and frozen fountains. Finally, Alaric spoke. My mother thinks you're trying to destroy her. I'm trying to do my job. She doesn't see a difference. He shoved his hands in his pockets. And I'm caught in the middle, which is exactly where I didn't want to be. Then choose a side. It's not that simple. It really is. Seraphine stopped walking. You're the Duke. Either you rule or she does. There's no middle ground. She's my mother. She raised me, taught me everything I know, and now she won't let you use any of it. Seraphine kept her voice steady. I'm not asking you to exile her or cut her off. I'm asking you to actually lead instead of hiding behind her decisions. His jaw clenched. I'm not hiding, aren't you? When was the last time you made an important decision without consulting her first? Yesterday, at the ball. Because I forced the issue. Because I put you in a position where you had to choose. She softened slightly. Alaric, I know this is hard, but if we're going to make this marriage work, if we're going to actually rule this duchy together, you have to stop letting her speak for you. And what if I make the wrong choices? Then we fix them. Together. That's what partners do. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. She's going to fight back. You know that. I'm counting on it. You sound almost excited. I'm tired of being invisible. If fighting back makes me visible, then yes, I'm ready. He almost smiled. You're either very brave or completely insane. Probably both.
This time he did smile, brief and genuine. My mother said the same thing.
The counterattack came 3 days later during a routine council meeting. Seraphine had started attending regularly, no longer asking permission. The lords had grown accustomed to her presence, even sought her opinion on occasion. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Varela arrived late, which was unusual. She took her seat beside Alaric with perfect composure, but there was something purposeful in her expression. "Gentlemen," she said, "before we begin regular business, I'd like to address a concern that's been brought to my attention." The room quieted. Lord Castor shuffled his papers nervously. "It seems," Varela continued, "that funds have been allocated to Lord Gavin's infrastructure project without proper treasury oversight. The ceremonial budget surplus, while technically available, was earmarked for diplomatic initiatives, hosting foreign dignitaries, strengthening alliances through cultural exchanges. Diverting those funds leaves us vulnerable diplomatically." Gavin stiffened. Seraphine felt her stomach drop. "With respect, Lady Varela," Lord Castor said carefully, "the surplus was approved for reallocation. The Duke himself authorized it." The Duke authorized infrastructure spending. He may not have fully understood the diplomatic implications. Varela's tone was gentle, almost apologetic. "It's an easy mistake. Budget categories can be confusing for those unfamiliar with the full complexity of duchy finances." The implication was clear. Alaric had been misled. By Seraphine. "I understood perfectly," Alaric said, his voice tight. "Of course you did, darling. But perhaps the presentation was simplified, made to seem straightforward when the reality is more nuanced." She was brilliant. She wasn't attacking Seraphine directly. That would look petty. Instead, she was suggesting Seraphine had manipulated the situation through incomplete information. It made Alaric look incompetent, and Seraphine look devious. "The numbers were accurate," Seraphine said. Lord Castor verified them. "The numbers were accurate for general revenue," Varela agreed, "but budget categories exist for specific purposes. Ceremonial funds maintain relationships with neighboring territories. Without those funds, we may struggle to host the spring embassy from the Eastern Kingdoms, or the autumn delegation from the merchant coalitions. Small oversights now that create larger problems later." "Then we find other funding," Alaric said. "From where? Military budgets? Medical services? Education?" Varela spread her hands. "Every allocation has consequences. That's why we review these decisions carefully before committing." "We reviewed it," Seraphine said, "for 3 years. We reviewed the proposal. We hadn't finalized funding sources." Varela's smile was patient. "There's a difference between considering options and rushing to implementation." It was masterful misdirection. Everything Varela said was technically true, but framed to make Seraphine's victory at the ball look reckless and short-sighted. Lord Castor cleared his throat. "If I may, the ceremonial budget has been consistently overfunded. We could reduce next year's allocation and reallocate current surplus without impacting diplomatic functions." "Could we?" Varela turned to him. "You're confident of that?" I believe so." "You believe, but you're not certain." She let the doubt hang. "Gentlemen, I'm not suggesting we cancel Lord Gavin's project. I'm simply proposing we delay implementation until we've secured alternative funding that doesn't compromise other vital functions." Delay. The word landed like a stone. This was the game: approval in principle, delay in practice. Keep reviewing, keep reconsidering, keep pushing off until momentum died. "No," Seraphine said. All eyes turned to her. "We're not delaying," she continued. "We made a commitment. Lord Gavin presented a thorough proposal. We approved it publicly, and now we're implementing it. If there are diplomatic funding concerns, we address them separately." "And how do you propose we do that?" Varela asked, her tone still pleasant. "We reduce waste. The Eastern Wing renovation was budgeted at 12,000 gold. The actual work cost 8. Where's the surplus? The Spring Festival decorations routinely come in under budget, but the savings never appear in the ledgers, and the household staff budget includes positions that haven't existed for 5 years. Seraphine had spent weeks reviewing the books. "We're hemorrhaging money through inefficiency and outdated allocations. Fix that, and we'll have plenty for both infrastructure and diplomacy." Silence. Even Varela looked momentarily surprised. Lord Castor flipped through his ledgers, frowning.
The Eastern Wing renovation, there should have been surplus, yes. It was reallocated to... He paused, checking entries. It's listed as miscellaneous administrative costs. Meaning what? Alaric asked. Meaning someone spent it without proper documentation. The implications rippled through the room. Virella's expression remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes.
Administrative oversights happen, she said smoothly. Over 30 years of managing duchy finances, small accounting discrepancies are inevitable. I can provide full accounting. Please do, Alaric said. I'd like to see where every gold piece has gone for the past 5 years. It was the first time he'd directly challenged his mother's financial management. Virella's smile thinned. Of course. Though it may take time to compile, take all the time you need, but Lord Gavin's project proceeds as approved. Alaric's voice was firm. We made a commitment. We're keeping it. Virella inclined her head, gracious in apparent defeat. But Seraphine knew better. This wasn't surrender. It was strategic retreat. The meeting concluded with uncomfortable tension. As lords filed out, Lord Gavin approached Seraphine. Thank you, he said quietly. Again. Don't thank me yet. She's not done.
I know, but you stood up anyway. He glanced at Virella, who was speaking with Alaric in low tones across the room. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Seraphine thought. The line between them was getting blurrier by the day. That evening, Clara brought news that shifted everything. Your Grace, you should know, Lady Virella has requested a full household audit. She's bringing in external accountants from the capital. Seraphine looked up from her correspondence. When?
They arrive next week. She's telling people it's routine financial review, but Clara hesitated. The servants are worried. An audit means everyone's spending gets scrutinized. Jobs could be cut. She's making me the villain, Seraphine realized. I questioned the finances, so now there's an audit. And if people lose their positions, it's my fault. Exactly, Your Grace. It was clever. Virella turned defense into offense, making her transparency look like Seraphine's witch hunt. If the audit found nothing, Seraphine looked paranoid. If it found problems, Virella could claim she was rooting out corruption that accumulated over decades, not her personal responsibility. Can I ask you something? Clara said. Of course. Why are you doing this? Wouldn't it be easier to just let her run things? You'd still be Duchess. You'd still have respect, comfort, influence. I'd have a title. That's not the same as having power. Seraphine set down her pen. And yes, it would be easier, but I didn't marry into this family to be a decorative accessory. I came here to build something meaningful. If that means fighting for it, then I fight. Clara nodded slowly. For what it's worth, Your Grace, some of us are glad you're here. The younger staff, especially. We've watched Lady Virella control everything for so long that we'd forgotten it could be different. Do the older servants feel the same? No, they're loyal to her. She's taken care of them, protected them. They see you as a threat. Am I? I don't know yet, Clara said honestly. But I hope not. After she left, Seraphine stared at the wall, considering her options. The audit would come whether she wanted it or not. She could either let Virella control the narrative or she could use it to her advantage. She needed allies, real ones, not just people frustrated with Virella's neglect. She needed someone with enough credibility that their support would matter. Commander Thane. He was military, not political, famously indifferent to court intrigue. But he was respected, honest, and reportedly frustrated with the duchy's bureaucratic inefficiencies. If she could get him on her side, it would signal to others that this wasn't just ambitious scheming. It was genuine reform. She found him in the armory, reviewing weapon inventories with his quartermaster. Commander, might I have a word? Thane looked surprised, but dismissed his quartermaster with a nod. Your Grace, I need your honest assessment of something. Go on. The duchy's military supply chains, are they efficient? He snorted. Efficient? We requisition equipment through 6 different administrative channels, each with separate approval requirements. Last month, I requested new armor for the northern garrison, still waiting for the 4th signature. Whose signature? Lady Virella's, ultimately. She oversees all major expenditures. Even military supplies? Everything goes through her office, has for years. He crossed his arms. Why are you asking? Because I think we can do better. Streamline processes, cut bureaucracy, get you the resources you need without waiting months for approval. Thane studied her carefully. You're picking a fight with Lady Varela. I'm trying to make the duchy work better. Those are the same thing. Seraphine didn't argue. Will you help me? Help you do what exactly? Document the inefficiencies. When the financial audit happens, I want to show that the problem isn't misallocation. It's over-centralization. Too much power in one person's hands creates bottlenecks. If we can prove that spreading authority actually improves function, you prove you're not just grabbing power, you're fixing a broken system. Thane nodded slowly. Smart. Is that a yes? It's a maybe. I don't play politics, Your Grace, but I do care about my soldiers getting the equipment they need. He paused. Let me think about it. It wasn't a commitment, but it wasn't a refusal either. She'd take it. The audit began a week later. 3 accountants from the capital descended on the duchy's financial records with systematic precision. Varela played the perfect host, gracious, cooperative, providing full access to every ledger and account. Seraphine watched carefully, noting what they examined and what they skipped. The accountants focused heavily on recent expenditures, particularly funds allocated since Seraphine's arrival. They barely glanced at older records, the ones that would show decades of Varela's consolidated control. On the 3rd day, Seraphine intercepted the lead accountant, a serious man named Corbin, in the library. Master Corbin, a moment. He looked up from his ledgers. Your Grace, I was wondering about the scope of your review. You're examining recent allocations, but what about historical patterns? Long-term budget trends? Lady Varela requested we focus on current fiscal year irregularities. I see. But wouldn't historical context help identify systemic issues versus isolated incidents? Corbin's expression remained neutral. We follow the scope provided by the commissioning party. Of course. Though as Duchess, I have authority to expand that scope, don't I? He hesitated. Technically, yes, though it would extend the audit considerably. How long? Another month at least. Seraphine smiled. Consider the scope expanded. I want a full review, 10 years minimum, every allocation, every expenditure category, every budget adjustment. Your Grace, that's quite extensive. And thorough. Isn't thoroughness the point of an audit? Corbin inclined his head. As you wish. When Varela learned of the scope expansion, her reaction was controlled but unmistakable. She found Seraphine in the gardens. You overstepped. I expanded the audit you commissioned. I thought you'd approve of transparency. Don't play games. You're fishing for evidence of wrongdoing that doesn't exist. Then the audit will prove that, and we'll all feel better. Varela stepped closer, voice dropping. You think you're being clever, but all you're doing is wasting duchy resources on a pointless investigation that will show exactly what I've told you all along. I've managed these finances flawlessly for 30 years. Then you have nothing to worry about. I'm not worried. I'm disappointed. Varela's expression hardened. I tried to guide you, to help you understand how things work. Instead, you've chosen confrontation over collaboration. That's your failing, not mine. Collaboration requires mutual respect. You've never respected me. Respect is earned through competence and wisdom, not demanded through marriage vows. Varela's voice was cold now. You want to be Duchess. Prove you deserve it, but understand this. Every move you make, I'm watching. Every mistake you make, I'll remember. And when you fail, and you will fail, don't expect sympathy. She walked away, leaving Seraphine alone among the winter bare roses. But Seraphine didn't feel defeated. She felt energized. Because Varela was rattled. For all her controlled fury, she'd shown genuine concern about the expanded audit, which meant there was something to find. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Commander Thane appeared at Seraphine's study unannounced, carrying a stack of military requisition forms. I've been thinking about what you said about documentation. And I went back through 5 years of supply requests. Every delay, every denied requisition, every unexplained budget hold. He spread the papers across her desk. There's a pattern. Seraphine examined the forms. Thane was right. Requests that should have taken days to approve languished for months. Critical supplies delayed while non-essential expenditures sailed through. Why? She asked. Control. Every delay requires resubmission, which requires another approval cycle, which keeps everyone dependent on Lady Virella's favor. Thane pointed to specific entries. See this? Request for winter gear for the mountain garrison. Denied 3 times as not urgent despite approaching snowfall. Finally approved after the garrison commander personally appealed to Lady Virella at a banquet. She made him beg publicly. Exactly. And here, medical supplies for the southern barracks, delayed 6 months while funds were under review. Meanwhile, she approved 12,000 gold for decorative fountain renovations in the same period. Seraphine felt her heart rate quicken. This isn't financial mismanagement, it's deliberate power consolidation. That's my assessment. Thane crossed his arms. I'm military, not political. But I know when my soldiers are being used as pawns in someone else's game. If you're serious about reform, I'm in. Thank you, Commander. Don't thank me yet. Lady Virella has connections throughout the military. Senior officers who owe her favors, who've been promoted through her influence. If you go after her, some of them will side with her. Will you? No. But I'm one man. He met her eyes. You're going to need more than documentation to win this. You're going to need people willing to stand with you when it gets ugly. I know. After he left, Seraphine sat with the requisition forms, mapping out the pattern of delays and approvals. It was systematic, not corruption in the traditional sense, but something more insidious. Virella didn't steal money. She controlled access to it, using bureaucracy as a weapon to maintain absolute authority. The audit results came back 3 days before the Spring Council. Master Corbin delivered his report personally, looking uncomfortable. Your Grace, Lady Virella, these are our findings. They gathered in Alaric's study, Seraphine, Virella, Alaric, and Lord Castor. Corbin opened his ledger with evident reluctance. Financially, the duchy is sound. No evidence of embezzlement or fraud. Lady Virella's management has been technically proper. Technically? Seraphine asked. Corbin cleared his throat. The financial controls are extremely centralized. Nearly all expenditures above 500 gold require Lady Virella's approval. This creates administrative bottlenecks, delays in payment, deferred maintenance, postponed projects. Efficiency requires oversight, Virella said smoothly. Yes, but the level of oversight here is unusual. Most duchies distribute financial authority across multiple offices, military supply separate from civil infrastructure, diplomatic budgets managed independently of household expenses. Corbin flipped through pages. Here, everything funnels through a single approval point. It's not illegal, but it's inefficient. How inefficient? Alaric asked. We estimate the duchy loses approximately 15% of potential productivity to approval delays. Projects that should take months take years. Critical needs wait behind non-essential expenditures because everything competes for the same approval pipeline. 15%. Seraphine felt vindication surge through her. These are educated guesses, not facts, Virella said. Efficiency is subjective. The military supply delays aren't subjective, Seraphine countered. Commander Thane provided documentation showing critical equipment requests delayed months while decorative renovations proceeded immediately. Virella's expression didn't change. Military requests require careful review. We can't approve every demand without proper vetting. Proper vetting or personal control? The words came out sharper than Seraphine intended. This isn't about control. It's about responsible governance. No, it's about you being unable to share power even when sharing it would make the duchy stronger. The room went silent. Lord Castor looked like he wanted to disappear. Alaric stared at both women, clearly torn. Master Corbin cleared his throat. If I may, our recommendation is to decentralize financial authority. Establish separate approval channels for military, infrastructure, and diplomatic expenditures. Maintain oversight through quarterly reviews rather than individual transaction approvals. That's a radical restructuring, Virella said. It's standard practice in comparable territories, Corbin replied. Alaric looked at his mother. Is there a reason we haven't done this? Because consolidated oversight prevents fraud, waste, and hasty decisions made without full information. Or it prevents anyone from acting without your permission, Seraphine said. Careful, Virella's voice was ice. You're accusing me of... I'm stating facts. You've built a system where nothing happens unless you approve it. That's not governance. That's autocracy with a duchess mask. Virella stood, her composure finally cracking. I have protected this duchy for 30 years. I've kept it stable through wars, famines, and incompetent rulers who would have destroyed everything without my guidance. And you've been here 6 months and think you understand better than I do? I understand that times change and systems need to adapt. You understand nothing. You're a child playing at power because you're jealous of what I've built. I'm a woman trying to do the job I was married into this family to do. If that threatens you, that's your problem, not mine. They faced each other across Alaric's desk, years of controlled animosity finally erupting into open hostility. Enough! Alaric's voice cut through the tension. Both of you, sit down. Neither woman moved. I said sit. Slowly, they complied. Alaric looked at Corbin. Your recommendations, their sound practice? Yes, Your Grace, standard in well-governed territories. Alaric turned to Varela. Mother, you've done extraordinary work. But Seraphine's right, we need to adapt. The system you built worked for its time. Maybe it's time for something new. You're siding with her. Varela's voice was quiet, dangerous. I'm siding with what's best for the duchy, which is what she's convinced you is best. Can't you see she's manipulating you? The only manipulation I see is you making me choose between my wife and my mother. Alaric stood. I'm implementing the auditor's recommendations. We'll decentralize financial authority, establish separate approval channels, and transition over the next 6 months. Varela's face went pale. Alaric, you'll remain chief advisor. Your experience is invaluable, but you won't have unilateral control anymore. He looked at Seraphine. And neither will you. This isn't about replacing one autocrat with another. It's about building a system that works better than either of you individually. It wasn't the victory Seraphine had imagined, but it was victory nonetheless. Varela's absolute control was broken. For the first time in 30 years, power would be distributed instead of concentrated. Varela stood slowly. I see. Well, if that's your decision, Your Grace, I'll of course comply. Her voice was perfectly controlled again, but her eyes promised retribution. Though I wonder how long this new system will last before inefficiency and chaos prove why consolidation was necessary. She left without waiting for dismissal. Lord Castor and Master Corbin made hasty exits, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama they'd witnessed. Alone with Alaric, Seraphine felt the adrenaline drain away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. That was brutal, Alaric said. It had to happen. Did it? Or did you force it because you were tired of waiting? Both. She met his eyes. Are you angry with me? I don't know what I am. He sank into his chair. She's right about one thing. I am choosing. And it terrifies me because I've never had to before. You chose correctly. Did I? Or did I just trade one problem for another? He rubbed his face. Seraphine, I need you to be honest with me. Is this about making the duchy better, or is it about proving you're stronger than my mother? The question hit harder than she expected. She wanted to say it was purely about governance, about justice, about doing what was right. But that would be a lie. Both, she admitted. I believe the reforms are necessary, but yes, I also need to prove I belong here, that I'm not just decoration. At least you're honest. Would you prefer I lie? I'd prefer you didn't back me into corners where I have to choose between the two most important women in my life. Then maybe you need to decide which one is actually your partner and which one is just used to being in charge. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not going to make this easy, are you? No, but I'll make it worthwhile. He almost smiled. You're either brilliant or insane. I keep hearing that. This time he did smile, tired but genuine. For what it's worth, I think you might be both, and maybe that's what this duchy needs. It was the closest thing to an endorsement she'd gotten from him. Not love, not even full trust, but recognition. Respect. It was a start. The Spring Council convened 2 days later with an energy Seraphine had never felt before. Word of the audit results and Alaric's decision had spread through the court. Lords arrived curious, cautious, calculating how the power shift would affect their positions. Varela entered last, immaculate in silver silk, her expression serene. She took her seat beside Alaric as always, but the chair seemed less central somehow. The balance had shifted. Alaric opened the council by announcing the reforms. Separate financial approval channels, distributed authority, quarterly oversight reviews. He framed it as modernization, not criticism, giving Varela an avenue to save face while still dismantling her control. The reactions were mixed. Some lords welcomed the streamlining. Others, loyal to Varela or benefiting from the old system, looked concerned. A few watched Seraphine with open interest, reassessing what her presence meant. Lord Gavin spoke first. "Your Grace, these reforms, will they expedite infrastructure projects that have been delayed?"
"That's the intent," Alaric said. "Then I fully support them. The western provinces have waited long enough." Other voices joined.
Military commanders relieved that supply requests would move faster. Merchants pleased that trade approvals wouldn't languish in bureaucratic limbo. Not everyone was convinced, but momentum was building. Varela remained silent through most of it, letting others voice concerns and support. Finally, near the meeting's end, she spoke. "These reforms are substantial. Perhaps we should implement them gradually, with oversight, to ensure we're not creating new problems while solving old ones." It was a delaying tactic, subtle but clear. "We'll implement them systematically," Alaric agreed, "but we'll start immediately. Commander Thane, your supply requisitions will now go through the Military Finance Office, with final approval from the Duke, not requiring additional administrative review." Thane straightened. "Understood, Your Grace." "Lord Castor, you'll establish the separate channels Master Corbin recommended. I want quarterly reports on efficiency improvements." "Yes, Your Grace." One by one, Alaric delegated authority, redistributed power, dismantled the centralized system his mother had built. Varela's expression never changed, but Seraphine saw her hands tighten on the armrests. When the council adjourned, lords approached Seraphine directly for the first time, not to pay respects, but to actually discuss duchy business. Lord Gavin wanted to coordinate infrastructure timelines. Lady Helena sought input on merchant guild negotiations. Commander Thane confirmed details about military supply reforms. They saw her now, not as the Duke's pretty wife or Lady Varela's rival, but as someone with actual authority. It felt like vindication and responsibility in equal measure. That evening, Clara brought unexpected news. "Your Grace, 3 senior household staff resigned today. Lady Varela's personal secretary, the estate steward, and the head of domestic services." Seraphine's stomach sank. Did they say why? Only that they felt the Duchess was moving in a direction they couldn't support. Clara's expression was sympathetic. "They've been with Lady Varela for over 20 years. She's like family to them." "So she's losing support, or she's cutting loose anyone who might be disloyal." "Maybe both," Clara paused. "There's something else. Lady Varela has invited several influential lords to a private dinner next week, including some who supported the reforms publicly. She's consolidating her remaining allies, or turning current allies into future opposition." Seraphine nodded slowly. The battle wasn't over. Varela had lost ground, but she still had influence, connections, and decades of carefully built relationships. She wouldn't surrender easily. But for the first time since arriving at the duchy, Seraphine felt like she had a real foothold. Not just a title, not just her husband's wavering support, but actual authority recognized by the court. She'd proven she could fight Varela's power and win. Now came the harder part, proving she could actually govern. The question was whether she actually could. Seraphine spent the next month learning the answer the hard way. Redistribution of authority sounded clean on paper. Separate approval channels, quarterly reviews, systematic oversight. Implementation was chaos. The Military Finance Office, newly independent, approved 3 requisitions that duplicated existing orders because no one had established communication protocols between departments. Lord Castor's separate budget channels created confusion about who authorized what, leading to a 2-week standstill where nothing got approved because everyone assumed someone else was handling it. And the infrastructure project Seraphine had championed so boldly hit immediate snags when engineers realized the western provinces lacked the skilled labor to execute the plans. Every problem landed on her desk. Every failure became evidence that dismantling Varela's system had been reckless. "This is a disaster," Lord Petty announced at a council meeting, his voice dripping with satisfaction. He was Varela's nephew, predictably hostile. "The military has duplicate equipment rotting in warehouses. Civil projects are stalled, and our quarterly expenditures are 15% over budget. Perhaps centralized oversight wasn't so terrible after all." Seraphine kept her expression neutral.
Growing pains are normal during transitions. Growing pains? Petty's laugh was sharp. Your Grace, with respect, this isn't teething, it's hemorrhaging. We're bleeding efficiency and funds because someone thought 30 years of proven governance needed modernization. Several lords nodded. Not many, but enough to sting.
Commander Thane spoke up. The military duplications were my office's error. We've implemented verification protocols. It won't happen again. But it did happen, Petty pressed. Under the old system, Lady Varela would have caught that redundancy before approval. Under the old system, we'd still be waiting 6 months for approval at all, Thane countered. The debate spiraled, voices rising. Alaric finally called for order, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. After the meeting, Seraphine found Alaric in the training yard, taking his frustration out on a practice dummy. That went well, she said. He drove his sword into the dummy's shoulder. Petty's an ass, but he's not wrong. The reforms are creating problems. Short-term problems while we establish new systems. That's expected. Is it? Or did we break something that worked just to prove we could? He yanked the sword free. My mother ran this duchy smoothly for 3 decades, 6 weeks of your improvements, and we're bleeding money and competence. The words cut deep. You agreed to the reforms. Because you backed me into a corner. Because the audit made me look weak if I didn't act. He faced her, sweating and frustrated. But what if she was right? What if centralizing authority wasn't about control? It was about preventing exactly this kind of chaos. It wasn't chaos, it was stagnation dressed up as stability. At least stagnation is predictable. Right now, I have no idea if we're fixing problems or creating worse ones. Seraphine stepped closer. Then trust that we can figure it out. Together. I'm trying to trust you, but you keep making me choose between you and my mother, and every choice makes things harder. Because she won't let go. Even after the reforms, she's still working behind the scenes. Dinners with sympathetic lords, quiet suggestions that the old system worked better, strategic positioning to make me look incompetent. Or maybe she's just hurt that her son dismantled her life's work, and she's trying to salvage what she can. There it was. The guilt Varela had been cultivating in him, the emotional manipulation disguised as wounded maternal love. Alaric, I'm not trying to destroy her. I'm trying to build something better. But I can't do it alone. And I definitely can't do it if you're going to second-guess every decision we make. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. Fix the budget overruns. Prove this wasn't a mistake. Give me something concrete to point to when people question whether we did the right thing. I will. But I need your support, not your doubt. You have both right now. Which one wins depends on whether you can actually deliver results. It wasn't a vote of confidence. It was a challenge. And Seraphine had 6 weeks to meet it before the quarterly review that would determine whether the reforms survived or got rolled back. She threw herself into the work with desperate focus. Lord Castor became her reluctant ally, walking her through duchy finances with exhausted patience. Commander Thane provided military perspective. Even Lady Helena offered Merchant Guild insights. Slowly, patterns emerged. The budget overruns weren't random. They came from departments that had been underfunded for years under Varela's centralized control. The military, for instance, had operated on artificially suppressed budgets, making do with inadequate equipment because requesting more meant navigating Varela's approval gauntlet. Now that they had direct access to funds, years of pent-up need exploded into immediate spending. It looks like waste, Lord Castor explained. But it's actually correction. We've been running deficits for years. We just hid them through delayed maintenance and deferred purchases. So the solution is establish realistic baseline budgets instead of artificially suppressed ones. It'll spike costs short-term, but stabilize long-term. Seraphine started building the case, documenting how Varela's efficiency had actually been cost deferral that created hidden debts. It wasn't corruption, but it wasn't honest accounting either. The problem was proving it before the quarterly review without making it look like a personal attack on Varela. Varela, meanwhile, wasn't idle. Her private dinners bore fruit. Lord Eston, who'd supported the reforms initially, started voicing concerns about rushed implementation. Lady Carmichael, a minor noble with significant mercantile influence, began questioning whether inexperienced leadership should be making such drastic changes. Even some of Seraphine's earlier allies wavered as problems mounted. Clara reported that Varela had been visiting the household staff personally, expressing concern about their job security under the new system. "She's not saying you'll fire people directly," Clara whispered, "just planting worry that decentralization means redundancies, budget cuts, uncertainty. Creating fear without making accusations." "Exactly. And it's working. Half the staff is terrified they'll lose their positions." Seraphine felt the trap closing. If she cut staff to balance budgets, she'd prove Virella's warnings correct. If she didn't, the budget overruns would continue and undermine the reforms. She needed a dramatic win, something undeniable. The opportunity came from an unexpected source: the Western Province's infrastructure project. Lord Gavin's engineers had stalled on implementation, lacking skilled labor. But Seraphine discovered that the Eastern merchant guilds, Lady Helena's contacts, had craftsmen who'd been idle since a major trade route closure. If she could redirect that labor westward, the infrastructure could proceed while providing employment to struggling workers. It would require negotiation between 3 separate interest groups, coordination across duchy boundaries, and careful budget balancing. Under Virella's system, it would take months of approvals and careful political maneuvering. Under the new system, Seraphine could make it happen in weeks if she moved fast. She assembled the key players in secret: Lord Gavin, Lady Helena, Commander Thane for logistics, and Lord Castor for finances. No formal council, no grand announcements, just practical people solving real problems. "You're asking me to send my guild workers westward?" Lady Helena frowned. "That's a month's travel. They'd need housing, food, fair wages, which Lord Gavin's project budget can cover," Seraphine said. "And once the infrastructure is complete, those new roads open trade routes that benefit your merchants directly. Short-term cost, long-term profit. It's risky. It's opportunity. The Eastern guilds have been struggling since the trade route closure. This gives them work and opens new markets." Helena considered. "I'd need guarantees, contract terms, payment schedules, compensation if the project fails." "Done. Lord Castor can draft terms today." They negotiated for 3 hours: wages, timelines, liability protections. It was exhausting, frustrating, and exhilarating. This was governance. Not symbolic authority or ceremonial power, but actual problem-solving that affected people's lives. By evening, they had an agreement. Guild workers would travel west, Lord Gavin's infrastructure would proceed, and new trade routes would open by autumn. It wasn't perfect. There were risks and complications, but it was real progress. "You know," Lord Gavin said as they finalized documents, "Lady Virella would have spent 6 months studying this proposal before deciding it was too complicated." "Maybe it is too complicated," Seraphine admitted, "but complicated doesn't mean impossible." The next morning, she presented the plan to Alaric. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "This is ambitious," he said finally. "It's necessary. If it fails, you'll look reckless. The quarterly review is 3 weeks away. You're gambling everything on a project that might not show results for months." "I'm gambling that showing initiative and problem-solving matters more than waiting for perfect conditions." She met his eyes. "You wanted concrete results. This is how we get them." He studied the documents, the contracts, the budget projections. "You did this without consulting me." "I did this without asking permission. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from here it looks like you're making unilateral decisions, exactly what you accused my mother of." The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. "The difference is I'm coordinating between people who all benefit, not controlling everything through a single approval point. Lord Gavin wanted infrastructure. Lady Helena needed work for her guilds. I connected them. That's collaboration, not autocracy. Or it's you building your own power base. Maybe. But at least I'm building something that helps people instead of just maintaining control." He was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, small and tired, but genuine. "You know what's terrifying? I think you actually believe that." "I do." "And you might be right. Or you might crash this entire duchy trying to prove a point." He signed the approval documents. "Let's find out which." It was the first time he'd backed her without reservation, without being forced into it. Not full trust, but partnership. A start. The quarterly review arrived with the weight of judgment. The council chamber was packed. Not just the usual lords, but minor nobles, merchant representatives, military officers. Everyone wanted to see whether the reforms would survive or collapse. Varela sat in her customary seat beside Alaric, composed and patient. She'd spent weeks positioning for this moment, planting doubts, building sympathy, waiting for Seraphine's reforms to fail spectacularly. Alaric opened the session. We're here to review the duchy's financial and administrative reforms implemented over the past quarter. Lord Castor, your report. Castor stood, looking nervous. The transition has been challenging. We've experienced budget overruns in several departments, administrative confusion during the initial weeks, and some duplicated expenditures. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Varela's expression remained neutral, but satisfaction flickered in her eyes. However, Castor continued, analysis shows these overruns stem from correcting years of suppressed budgets and deferred maintenance. The military, for instance, operated on artificially low funding that created hidden equipment deficits. Now that spending is transparent, we're seeing the true cost of operations. So the reforms cost more, Lord Petty interjected. As predicted. Short term, yes, but they also revealed structural problems we'd been ignoring. Castor distributed documents. These charts show projected costs over 5 years. The initial spike stabilizes by year 2 and produces net savings by year 3 through improved efficiency and reduced administrative overhead. Projections aren't reality, Varela said quietly. We're dealing with actual deficits now based on hopeful predictions about the future. Which is why we're also presenting immediate results, Seraphine said, standing. The Western Province's infrastructure project broke ground last week. Guild workers from the Eastern Territories began construction using the new expedited approval process. Under the previous system, this project would still be under review. Under the current system, it's operational. She presented photographs. Workers laying road foundations, engineers surveying bridge sites, merchants celebrating the coming improvements. This project will complete in 6 months instead of 3 years, Seraphine continued. It employs 300 workers who were previously idle. It will increase Western Province trade revenue by an estimated 40% within 2 years. And it happened because we removed bureaucratic obstacles and let competent people do their jobs. Lord Gavin stood. I've waited 3 years for this infrastructure. 3 years of requests, proposals, and delays. The Duchess made it happen in 6 weeks. That's the difference between the old system and the new one. Lady Helena rose as well. The merchant guilds support these reforms. We've seen faster approval times, clearer communication, and actual collaboration instead of waiting for permission from a single authority. One by one, others stood. Commander Thane, minor nobles who'd been overlooked under Varela's control, even a few of the previously skeptical lords. Not everyone, not even a majority, but enough to show momentum. Varela watched it happen with perfect composure. When the room quieted, she stood. These are impressive short-term achievements, she said, and I genuinely commend the Duchess for her energy and initiative. But governance isn't about dramatic gestures. It's about sustained stability over decades. We're 6 weeks into these reforms. Ask me again in 6 months whether they've truly improved the duchy or simply created new problems we haven't encountered yet. It was reasonable, measured, and designed to undermine without directly attacking. Classic Varela. You're right, Seraphine said, surprising everyone. 6 weeks isn't enough to prove lasting success. But it's enough to prove the old system wasn't working as well as we pretended. The question isn't whether these reforms are perfect. They're not. The question is whether we're willing to improve or whether we'd rather maintain comfortable dysfunction. She turned to address the full council. Lady Varela built something remarkable. 30 years of stability and strength. But systems that work for one generation don't automatically work for the next. Times change, needs change, and leadership that refuses to adapt eventually becomes the problem it was designed to solve. Varela's expression flickered, just for an instant, anger breaking through the composed facade. Adaptation without wisdom is just reckless change, she said. And wisdom without adaptation is just stubborn pride. They faced each other across the council chamber, the tension so thick it felt physical. This was the moment, the culmination of months of conflict, the final confrontation. Alaric stood. The room silenced immediately. I've listened to both arguments, he said. My mother's caution and my wife's ambition. Both have merit. Both have risks. He paused, gathering himself. But here's what I know. The duchy wasn't broken before these reforms, but it wasn't thriving either. We were stable, yes, we were functional, but we'd stopped growing. We'd stopped questioning whether we could do better. He looked at Varela. Mother, you built something extraordinary. You saved this duchy when it should have collapsed. I owe everything to your strength and guidance. But I'm not my father. I'm not content to let someone else govern while I just sign papers and command armies. I want to actually lead, and that means making my own decisions, right or wrong. Varela's face went pale. Alaric, I'm not dismissing you. I'm not exiling you. I'm asking you to be an advisor instead of the actual ruler. His voice was firm, but not cruel. The reforms continue. We'll adjust what doesn't work. We'll fix the problems as they arise. But we're not going back to the old system. That chapter is over. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Varela stood frozen, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. For the first time since Seraphine had known her, she looked genuinely hurt. Not just angry or strategic, but wounded. After everything I've done, Varela said quietly, everything I've sacrificed. This is how you thank me? I'm thanking you by finally taking responsibility for my own duchy instead of hiding behind your competence. Alaric's expression was pained but resolute. That's not rejection. That's respect. I learned from the best. Now I need to prove I learned well. Varela stared at her son for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and left the council chamber. Her departure was silent, dignified, and absolutely final. The room erupted again. Some lords looked shocked, others relieved, a few openly pleased. Seraphine felt a complicated mix of victory and guilt. She'd won, but the cost was visible in Alaric's face, the pain of choosing himself over his mother's control. Lord Castor cleared his throat. Shall we, continue with the review? Adjourned, Alaric said. We'll reconvene tomorrow. People filed out slowly, whispering. Seraphine approached Alaric, who stood staring at the door his mother had exited through. Are you all right? She asked. No, but I will be. He looked at her. That was harder than any battle I've fought. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. You were right. She was never going to let go voluntarily. He rubbed his face. I just wish it didn't have to hurt this much. They stood together in the emptying chamber, two people who'd just burned down the old world and had no idea if the new one they were building would actually work. Seraphine found Varela in her private study that evening. The older woman sat by the window, staring out at the gardens she'd designed 30 years ago. Come to gloat? Varela asked without turning. No, to talk. We have nothing to discuss. I think we do. Seraphine entered uninvited, closing the door behind her. You're right about one thing. I am ambitious. I did want power, but not because I enjoy fighting with you, because I refuse to be invisible. Congratulations. You're very visible now. You've won. Varela's voice was hollow. Was it worth it? I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months. Varela finally turned to face her. She looked older somehow, the fight drained out of her. Do you know what it's like to build something from nothing? To take a dying duchy and make it strong through sheer will and endless work? To sacrifice your own desires, your own identity, everything you might have been, for duty? No, but I know what it's like to have potential and be told to sit quietly and look pretty while someone else does the real work. You could have learned. I would have taught you. You would have controlled me. There's a difference. Varela's smile was bitter. Perhaps, but my control kept this duchy alive. Your freedom might destroy it, or it might make it stronger than either of us could alone. They regarded each other, two strong women who'd been on collision course from the moment they met. Enemies, but also mirrors of each other in ways neither wanted to admit. I don't forgive you, Varela said. I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm asking if we can find a way forward that doesn't require one of us to disappear. You have what you wanted. Why do you need anything from me? Because you're brilliant, experienced, and you genuinely care about this duchy. I was serious when I said I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm trying to make space for both of us. Varela studied her for a long moment. You're either remarkably naive or remarkably clever. I haven't decided which. Probably both. That seems to be your answer for everything. It served me well so far. Varela turned back to the window. I'll stay.
I'll advise when asked, but don't expect me to be gracious about this transition. You've taken my life's work and called it insufficient. That's not something I'll forget or forgive easily. I know, but at least you'll be here. That's more than I expected. Don't mistake presence for acceptance. I'm staying because this is my home and my family, not because I approve of what you've done. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was détente, a cold peace that might someday thaw into something more functional. Seraphine left her there, staring out at the gardens, and felt the weight of what she'd accomplished finally settling in. 6 months later, the duchy had found its new rhythm. The infrastructure projects in the western provinces were ahead of schedule. Trade revenues were climbing. The military had proper equipment for the first time in a decade. Administrative efficiency had improved once the initial chaos settled into systematic processes. There were still problems, budget challenges, political tensions, administrative hiccups, but they were manageable problems, not systemic dysfunction. Seraphine stood in the council chamber, presenting the half-year financial report. Lord Castor had verified every number. Commander Thane had confirmed military improvements. Lady Helena reported increased merchant satisfaction. Even Lord Gavin, typically cautious, expressed optimism about Western Province development. Varela sat in her seat beside Alaric, listening with careful attention. She rarely spoke at councils anymore, but when she did, people listened. Her expertise hadn't diminished, just her absolute control. After the meeting, Alaric found Seraphine in their chambers. "You did it," he said. "We did it, together. I'm serious. You came here with nothing but a title and conviction. Now you're actually governing. The duchy is better for it." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "I'm sorry I doubted you. You had reason to doubt. I was untested. You were untested. Now you're proven." He smiled, genuine and warm. "My mother was wrong about you. You're not reckless. You're bold. There's a difference. I learned from watching her, actually. She taught me that power isn't given. It's claimed through competence and courage." She'd hate hearing that. "I know. That's why I'll probably tell her eventually." He laughed, pulling her close. "You're impossible." "You married me anyway? Best terrible decision I ever made." They stood together, watching the sun set over the duchy. They were learning to rule together. Imperfectly, sometimes chaotically, but genuinely. In her study, Varela reviewed the quarterly reports alone. The numbers were good, better than she'd expected. The duchy was thriving under the distributed authority she'd fought so hard against. It galled her to admit it, but Seraphine had been right. Not about everything. The girl was still reckless, still too quick to act without fully understanding consequences. But about the core issue, centralized control had been holding the duchy back. Varela had built something remarkable, but she'd built it for herself, not for succession. She'd never truly prepared Alaric to rule independently, because doing so would have meant relinquishing power. And she'd been too proud, too invested in her own competence to let go. Seraphine had forced the issue. Messily, dramatically, with all the subtlety of a cavalry charge. But she'd forced it nonetheless. Varela closed the reports and poured herself wine. She'd lost control of the duchy. But the duchy hadn't collapsed. In fact, it was stronger. That was simultaneously satisfying and infuriating. She raised her glass to the empty room. "Well played, girl. Well played." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. A year after Seraphine's arrival, the duchy hosted a grand council, all the major lords, merchants, military commanders, and allied territories gathering to formalize trade agreements and discuss regional security. Seraphine stood beside Alaric at the high table, wearing crimson and gold, the Thorn family diamonds at her throat. But this time she wasn't decorative. She was co-presiding, addressing lords with authority they actually respected. Varela sat nearby, not at the center of power, but still present, still valued. When complex historical questions arose, Alaric consulted her. When diplomatic nuance was needed, her insight proved invaluable. She'd become what she'd always claimed to be, an advisor, not the actual ruler. During a break in proceedings, Lord Gavin approached Seraphine. "Your Grace, the Western provinces wanted me to formally thank you. The infrastructure you championed has transformed our economy. Trade is up 60%. "The infrastructure you designed," Seraphine corrected. "I just removed the obstacles preventing it." "Sometimes that's exactly what's needed." As he walked away, Varela appeared beside her. "Gracious in victory. How diplomatic." Seraphine turned.
They'd maintained professional courtesy for months, but hadn't truly talked since their confrontation. Not victory, just doing the job. Is there a difference? I think there is. Victory implies defeating an opponent. This was about building something better. Varella's expression was unreadable. You've changed the duchy significantly in 1 year. Not all for the worse, I'll admit, though I'd never say that publicly. I wouldn't expect you to. My son seems happier, more confident. That's worth something. It was the closest thing to approval Varella had ever offered. Seraphine felt unexpected emotion tightening her throat. He learned from you, the foundation you built. I couldn't have done any of this without it. Don't patronize me. I'm not. I mean it. You made this duchy strong enough to survive change. That's remarkable. Varella studied her for a long moment. You're still reckless, still too quick to act, but you're learning restraint. That's progress. Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment. You should. I don't give them often. Varella paused. For what it's worth, I understand why you fought me. You saw a cage and refused to accept it. I can respect that, even if I hated experiencing it. And I understand why you held on so tightly. You built this. Letting go must have felt like losing yourself. It did. It still does sometimes. Varella's expression softened slightly. But perhaps there's room for both of us here. Different roles, different strengths. If we can manage not to destroy each other first. I'd like that. Don't expect us to be friends. I'm not, but maybe we can be colleagues, partners in keeping this duchy strong. Varella considered, then extended her hand. Colleagues, nothing more. Seraphine shook it. The gesture was formal, almost cold, but it was a beginning. That night, Seraphine and Alaric stood on their private balcony overlooking the duchy lit by lamplight and stars. What are you thinking? Alaric asked. That I came here terrified I'd disappear, that I'd become just another overlooked duchess in your mother's shadow. And now? Now I know I was never in danger of disappearing. The real challenge was figuring out how to exist alongside someone so powerful without losing myself or destroying her. She leaned against him. We're still figuring it out, but I think we're getting there. You fundamentally changed this duchy in 1 year. That's extraordinary. We changed it. You, me, even your mother, reluctantly. It took all of us. He kissed her forehead. I love you. I'm not sure I've said that enough. You haven't said it at all. Then I'm saying it now. I love you. Your courage, your stubbornness, your refusal to accept limitations. You made me a better duke by refusing to be a silent duchess. She turned to face him fully. I love you too. Even when you drive me crazy. Even when you're too cautious or too loyal to old patterns. You chose partnership over comfort. That took real courage. They kissed, and for the first time since their wedding night, it felt like true partnership. Not political alliance or obligation, but genuine connection. Below them, the duchy settled into evening rhythms. Markets closing, families gathering. The complex machinery of governance and life continuing forward. Seraphine had claimed her place not through birthright or permission, but through competence, courage, and sheer refusal to be erased. She'd faced down one of the most powerful women in the realm and emerged not victorious, but transformed. They both had. The duchy was stronger for it, governed not by singular authority, but by collaborative strength, not by control, but by distributed power. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real, functional, and built on the hard-won balance forged through conflict, intelligence, and the courage to stand and claim one's place. Seraphine looked out over her duchy, truly hers now, earned through battle and compromise, and smiled. She'd arrived as Lady Seraphine Vale, afraid of being lost in someone else's shadow. She'd become Duchess Seraphine Thorne, a force in her own right, partner to a duke finally learning to rule, and respected even by the woman who'd tried to keep her powerless. That was worth every fight, every doubt, every terrifying moment when success seemed impossible. She'd found her place. She'd claimed her power. She'd transformed not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. And she was just getting started.